Morning, Jason. Thanks for meeting with me today.
Hayley, good morning. How are you?
I'm very well. I'm very well. It's been known to the market that you are the supplier diversity king. So we are here today to talk all about supply diversity and why it's important.
I'm merely a vessel. Okay.
Very good, very good. Well, listen, I thought before we get into the real gritty topic, it would be really good just to get an understanding of you, your backstory, your career to date, and
Yeah.
then talk about Kaleida and why it's been born, essentially.
Yeah. Well, look, I think what's great is that supply diversity is so much bigger than Kaleida, right? But my story begins. I'm 42, nearly 43 years old now, and didn't go to university, but started working within investment banking for about 11 years. So I spent 5 years at JP Morgan and a number of other organization, investment banks as well. And then about 13 years actually selling technology back to banks, asset managers and hedge funds. And it was in those 23, 24 years or so, I came up with a couple of experiences that led me to kind of feel there was a need for a platform that Collider ultimately is and does. It all revolved really around prejudicial and stereotypical type experiences that I had, um, and trying to find a way to help also bridge the gap between the buyers and suppliers, right? So, for example, and I won't say which particular company this was at, but uh, you know, one of the times I experienced a conversation with a member of a colleague who, for whatever reason, was upset with what we were doing as a technology department and kind of got up in my face, and I actually ended up walking away. But when I went back to my desk, my manager called me to his office and said, look, Jason, next time you go over to someone's desk, just bend down a bit instead of stooping over them. Because remember, you're a big guy. You're a big black guy. And those words really sat with me because I wasn't really aware. Look, I grew up in Brixton, okay?
You actually said those words.
Sorry?
You actually said those words, do you?
But those were the exact words. Now, but
Wow.
what he was doing, and I understand his intention. His intention was to teach me that, Jason, sometimes people will see you differently to how you might see yourself. I just saw myself as Jay, right? But sometimes people put labels on you or stereotypes on you that end up becoming a weight or a burden on you. Now, I was, despite being from Brixton, a single parent Caribbean mother raised me and my brother and sister. Race or color and issues and prejudice wasn't part of the narrative or the vernacular that we had as a people, right? As a child growing up. So I went into this situation a bit naively, not understanding how people would perceive me. Now, if I kind of fast forward to when I was in sales as well, often when I became aware or self-aware of what people saw of me, this big 6'5" black male, intimidating, Daily Mail kind of like headlines, it made me understand that when I went into a sales situation, that those tropes, those stereotypes sometimes preceded me. It basically meant that there was an unconscious bias in
Yeah.
the sales room as well. It's the same thing that women experience,
Yeah.
that disabled people experience, that the LGBTQ community experience, that there's always this stereotype and bias and prejudice. And like I say, an unconscious, sometimes conscious bias that they have to overcome to help them get some level of equality or equity in this day and age where people are quite quick to throw judgment.
Yeah.
So
And
yeah, go ahead, sorry.
so are you having to adapt your style to suit your audience to make yourself appear less
Threatening.
stereotypically threatening?
Yeah. So
That,
look,
yeah.
so this is a good example, right? For a number of years, of those 13 years, I was actually the head of sales for these large US technology companies. Okay. Um, and so often I would be running the office in the UK or working in tandem with a small team in the UK to launch the product in the UK market. And often I'd go into the sales room, and a lot of them are, white, cisgendered, silver-haired male. And again, this is not saying that those individuals are consciously biased or unconsciously biased, but that was typically what the room felt like. And when I went into that room, I often had to try to make myself feel less threatening to what was the perception of how I was perceived.
Yeah.
So I would start with something, like a comment like, oh God, it's nice to be out of the house and away from the wife and kids. Because I try to normalize that
Yeah.
as a black man, we're not just single parent families. Black men don't leave their kids and all kind of, I try to dispel these negative stereotypes just to bring any hesitation in the room that might prevent me from doing my job well.
Yeah.
Okay. Or prevent the sale going through, because there was, you know, there's a saying that people buy from people, but also people buy from people who look like them and feel like them. And there's an understanding in this network. Yeah. And because I wasn't particularly like anyone in those executive rooms, it felt alien. And therefore I had to try to normalize my normal. And that's part of the journey that helped me to build the Kaleida platform, which is essentially, look, we understand that if you're a female CEO, okay, or you're a disabled entrepreneur, or maybe even you're a veteran business owner, when you walk into those rooms, particularly where a company, the buying company, hasn't performed any level of EDI or D&I training for their staff, you are perceived in a certain way that you have to try to overcome in order to normalize your presence in that room and then be seen for the product or service that you're selling. Yeah. There's a lot more barriers to overcome. And ultimately that's a bit of a long introduction, but that's my background and why I built the Kaleida platform, essentially to connect buyers to suppliers, but without any, you know, we're fully inclusive, right? Without any requirement or demands or expectations on who an individual is.
Yeah, brilliant. And I assume I know the answer to this, but why the name Kaleida?
So I wanted to basically build a feature in the platform that whenever you turn a dial, right, just like a kaleidoscope,
yeah.
the Kaleida, there'll be a feature in the platform that when you turn it, you'll see the supply chain break out. So you turn it 1 degree and you'll see 1 degree of separation. Right. Then you'll turn it again, you'll see your suppliers, and you can continue to kind of see who your suppliers are and who their suppliers are to kind of see where, and if you do buy from an organization, where will your revenue that they earn make an impact?
See, I had it that it was kaleidoscope, it derived from there, but in my head it was a kaleidoscope is all colors of the spectrum, and actually that was the diversity piece. It was, you know, it's without bias, so you buy from anybody. So
yeah, so
that's interesting.
You know what? I might have to adopt that perception. But you know, the peacock we have as our emblem is also about that as well. It's about attraction. It's about colors. It really invokes togetherness. You know, a lot of the platforms today are blue and white for the most part, right? And it's quite corporate, quite vanilla in a sense now for what these platforms are. And I wanted Kaleida to stand out and be different. That the colors of the rainbow that are typified by you know, by the LGBTQ community is reflected in that, because it's all about diversity and about difference and being accepted. So that's the long version of the short story.
Brilliant. Well, we know the why in terms of why you set it up. Who is Kaleida aimed at, and kind of how is it functionally used?
Right. So if you look at supply diversity in general today, right, what you find is the biggest challenge or threat to a successful supply diversity program is that data is everywhere. And what buyers actually want, the buying corporate organizations, right, and the procurement teams, is they want one golden source of data to go to find diverse suppliers. So Kaleida is a fully inclusive B2B marketplace. It's aimed at those who work in sales and those who work in procurement, compliance, and marketing. Because if you look at other existing social media platforms today, they very much focus on the people element, right? They're very people focused, but Kaleida means business. We're about business. We're about connecting businesses together, irrespective of the individuals involved. Because if you think about it, when a salesperson or procurement person leaves an organization, you still have to have a relationship between both entities, right? Both corporate buyer and the supplier entity. So what we've done is to solve the problem that data is everywhere. Okay, look, take it back a bit. If a corporate today wanted to spend money with diverse organizations, they typically have to join maybe 7, 8, 9, maybe 12 different NGO organizations or non-governmental organizations or advocacy groups. That means if you make a massive commitment to spend $1 billion, okay, we know that those checks they're going to cut are roughly 50 grand to 100 grand worth of product they'll buy through that tender process. Okay, because that's typically what an SME or diverse supplier can support or deliver. So what they need to do is send that $150,000 tender to these 10 different groups to the women organizations, the minority organizations, the veteran organizations, the disabled vet organizations, the LGBTQ organizations, and it just becomes too difficult. So what I wanted to do was build a platform where we're fully inclusive. The whole purpose is this. We've got a saying that is exclusive is actually not inclusive, right? If a corporate is supporting just one or two of those communities, it excludes those who are not part of those communities.
Yeah,
And
it's
that
a
becomes
positive discrimination, isn't it?
it's positive discrimination, and it's only positive, and it's only done because there's not a technology solution to really solve the problem of, Jason, you know, we want to go to one place, we want to put a tender into one place, and it goes to all 15 different diverse identities.
Yeah. And is that why?
I say 15 based on regional territories as well. Because what we do is, you know, a diverse supplier is typically a company which is 51% owned by a diverse identity. Right. So you could be an ethnic minority, you could be a female founder, LGBTQ plus, there's veterans, there's neurodiverse, there's disabled veterans and disabled, right? So when those are kind of the main communities, but then you try to roll that out in maybe in Singapore or South Africa or Australia or Poland, diversity becomes different. It's not about being Black or Asian. It could be something different as a minority. So those are the challenges that these organizations face when trying to not positively discriminate and be seen through the lens of the public society that, you know, they're looking after the women-owned businesses, but what about the LGBTQ community? We actually say, look, exclusive is not inclusive. So in actual fact, everyone can join the Kaleida platform and any buyer can find everyone they want. And then they hire or appoint the winner to the tender based on the attributes and ability of the organization, not the fact that they've tried to find a female founder to solve a problem.
And can that be done blind, or will they know who the supplier is in terms of what diverse population they stand for?
So our take on this is, let's give you access to everyone, and then you can determine who's the best fit for you. And the way that they will assess a fit is by a couple of features within the platform itself. One is, for example, who are you currently serving? Who do you currently sell to? Yeah. If you're an investment bank and this particular supplier that you found already sells to another investment bank, there's some credibility and kudos in that initial assessment. Yeah. But also, as I mentioned at the top, companies post content as well, right? So it's not people posting content, it's companies. So a buyer can read a bit about that company, understand who they are, and there's some other features as well to help you assess a supplier before you invite them to participate in the tender. So it's more about supplier discovery for a sourcing event. Yeah. You haven't got to discriminate against who you select, and then you can make a determination based on a couple of factors that we present in front of the screen.
Brilliant. And do you think that the challenge with actually getting running with a supplier diversity program lies in the bureaucracy that you mentioned early on? Because you've just got it's quite onerous, I guess, to sign up to all these separate groups. Is that the challenge, or is it something else, do you think, that stops people from doing it?
So there's a couple of things, right? One of the precursors to a successful supplier diversity program, as I mentioned before, is a successful EDI program. If you can reduce conscious bias or unconscious bias in your offices from an employee perspective, when taking into account or consideration the 9 protected characteristics, when maybe a Muslim or a Sikh or a Black person or a female founder comes into your offices, you've already dealt with unconscious bias. It makes it easier. The second challenge that makes it very difficult for buyers to be successful today is, I've mentioned, data is everywhere. It's very hard. Look, you try to Google right now an LGBTQ plus butcher, right? Maybe you're in a hotel, you're trying to find a new supplier of meat for your restaurants in your hotel. You can't really capture or search for an LGBTQ plus butcher in Bristol. The data doesn't exist. So the biggest challenge is actually trying to identify, find and assess diverse suppliers irrespective of territory. Yeah. Now in the US, we have to be very careful. In the US, they've done a great job. Supply diversity was born in the US maybe some 35, 40 years ago or so. Right. Okay. So they've got a lot of advocacy groups and support groups who already, and they've got legislation as well, that enables and encourages and actually demands that diverse suppliers be used. The challenge for UK, Europe, EMEA, the Asia Pac region, is there are no legislations around that. Data is quite hard to, and there's a lot of privacy around data.
Yeah.
So those are some of the challenges that corporate buyers will experience. The other one actually is getting their executive team to agree to write this into policy. So nothing will happen from a supply diversity perspective unless there's policy really pushing it down and encouraging that the procurement team, that they supporting the procurement function and team to deliver a supply diversity program. So it has to come from the execs. I think finally, maybe there are a couple, but we can look at delivering a global supply diversity program globally and how you can find diverse suppliers irrespective of region where you might operate.
Yeah.
But I think determining this, whether you determine a spend, a value. So look, Unilever have done a great job. They came out last year and they said, right, we want to spend 2 billion euros per year for 5 years with diverse suppliers. A fantastic commitment. Procter & Gamble raised their target from $2 billion to $5 billion per year. So these are great numbers to put out there. The challenge for some other organizations might be their reach. So how do we find these diverse suppliers that allows us to actually achieve our goals of the amount of spend we want to have with diverse suppliers?
Yeah, I think
so. You have to be, yeah.
No, go on.
Yeah, no. So you want to have to be very careful, right, to make a commitment verbally and publicly, and actually be able to deliver on that. And when that's not possible, it then makes companies retract slightly until they actually have a solution that can help them find diverse suppliers to realistically hit their target and not be seen as kind of greenwashing supply diversity.
Yeah, and I think part of it is, like you say, it's that accountability piece. If you've publicly declared it, you are being held to account on delivering on it. I think for smaller businesses that don't necessarily declare their commitments in those ways, how would you advise an organization that's starting out on this journey? Because typically EDI policy will sit within a HR function. Supplier diversity is clearly linked to the procurement function. What advice have you got for a business that is going, right, this is now on our agenda firmly? How do I start? And what would you?
Yeah, it's a good question. So there are a couple of things you can do, right? Primarily, step away from the number, okay? If you can improve your accessibility to diverse suppliers, that actually is a really great way to communicate what your objectives are.
Right.
So we want to be more accessible to diverse suppliers. The challenge for small businesses and diverse suppliers is they're concerned around how do they get access to a corporate buyer, right? If you've got, I don't know, a $50 billion procurement spend per year, how do I get access to that company when every time I call them, I get the phone put down on me? I reach out on LinkedIn and I try to say, hi, I'm Jason from this company. Can I sell you something? The person on LinkedIn says, don't contact me here. I don't want to be sold to. So just by communicating a message that you want to be more accessible to diverse suppliers and that you have a partner to help facilitate that is a really good way to positively put yourself in the right light, that you're trying to do the right thing without making commitments that you actually can't commit to.
Okay.
Yes, and I guess the second one is perhaps to consider is look at percent of spend, or if you have a large tender for £1 million, for example, can you cut off 10% of that and do like a mini consortium of 2 suppliers, one marquee vendor who could deliver the whole 100%, but in actual fact, you take away 10% from them and then you apportion it to a partner, right, that you introduce to this big vendor and have them work together. There's a couple of solutions that you can have to really help encourage supply diversity, to solve problems that buyers experience, and programs that you can build internally to make sure that you can deliver successfully on those goals and commitments that you have.
Yeah, okay. Now you mentioned we're about 40 years behind the US, and some of that's down to kind of legislation and data, but why now, do you think? Why is EDI, sustainability, these key pillars now that organizations are committing all this spend to, why is it on everyone's agenda now?
So I saw a real change in society back in 2020 when George Floyd was murdered.
Yeah.
Right? It was televised, it was seen by everyone, and it became undeniable. Now, when Rodney King was beaten up by police back in the day, that's probably, I don't know, was it like late 80s? There was still some denial around around racism, around conscious bias, around how society treats certain people of certain diverse identities. With George Floyd, it appeared as though you had at the same time, the prominence of the rainbow movement. The LGBTQ community came out fighting for equality for themselves and to not be discriminated against and to be able to walk down the street without being abused or assaulted. You've had, female founders become billionaires who are, you've had the whole fight for female equality and for gender pay equality. There's been a lot of what I guess it's a confluence of events has really brought all this to the fore, where companies now say, in actual fact, unless we can do something about, I guess you can put it this way, it's not just the ethical thing to do, it makes commercial sense as well, right? And unless we do something about it, we'll no longer be able to attract top talent. Our talent will leave us because they expect now and demand, and they now have a voice and a position in the company to say, unless you have a supply diversity program, or unless you're going to support women and close the pay gap, we will take our human resource elsewhere. And so I think people power, being voted by their feet really, has really encouraged companies to take a look at what they can do. And the great thing is, and I say it makes it commercial sense as well. Look at Disney. Disney bought the Marvel franchise. They built and produced Black Panther. I think it's the second highest grossing Marvel film in history, right? But why was that? It's because representation actually works. Yeah. What you had was, for the first time, little black boys wanting to be the Black Panther. You had little white boys, little white girls wanting to be Black Panther. There was now an association with superheroes, and that it just changed the tone of what does good look like. But what that did through representation successfully was it meant that they made a massive box office hit as well, and earned billions and billions of dollars, because it attracted a brand new market in a way that it hadn't been able to attract and appeal to before. And so they followed that model with Mona. Is it Moana? Not Mona.
Moana. Yeah.
I love Moana. Great songs in that. The Rock done a great job in that one. It was The Rock, isn't it?
It was The Rock. Yeah.
Right. So representing different cultures ultimately attracts revenue. But not only does it attract revenue, the ITV, a UK TV station or channel production company, they recently did a report, some research reports, right, where they surveyed 10,000 people, and it was all focused on the Christmas ad. And I think for 2019, where I think Sainsbury's did an ad with an Indian family, and if I remember correctly, it was the advert focused on, I think, like an Indian style Christmas dinner. Okay. Yeah. But the question that they asked the participants in the poll was, how do you feel when seeing this? Now, very few people said it's not a traditional Christmas dinner, and they were the ones that were the outliers, right? Everyone else said, it feels great to see representation. It created what's called a happy index.
Yeah.
Okay. And what we know now through the research is that when there's representation and it's done the right way, corporates can recognize probably about 3% market share gain through recognizing and representing society. So to your question, what's changed? There's data to support it. There's an appetite from the public to endorse it. And companies now understand that there's also commercial gain for them as well. And there's not a problem with saying there's a commercial handshake or exchange, right? That those who have been historically marginalized get access to opportunity, and companies make a buck from it as well. Perfectly fine and reasonable expectation.
Yeah, and we see exactly the same in the recruitment industry. It's no different. We work with a lot of CPOs, and we interview a lot of senior leaders. And actually, when you're looking to encourage the procurement leaders of the future, it's about representation. Yeah. And actually, when companies come to us and say, oh, yeah, we're a diverse organization and we welcome EDI, we've got these great policies, I'll go onto their company page and look at their board. And if their board members are all white middle-aged men, that tells me that you haven't taken the first step in the rung, because it's got to start from the top for people
Has
to
to.
see that representation, to encourage the leaders of the future. And you're right, organizations that will be listening to this today and thinking, I don't see the value in supplier diversity, or I'm not quite there yet, will suffer, because people want more from an organization
That's
they
right.
work for now. It's not just about salary and benefits. It's so much bigger than what
Yeah, there is. Yeah, we are so much more socially conscious now, and I think that's a good thing, because for far too long, and I was just thinking about it yesterday actually, for far too long, there's been an imbalance, right? Where my mother always said to me, right, Hayley, she's always said, Jason, you'll have to work twice as hard to get half as far. Now, a lot of people from the Caribbean and African background will have been told that, because we grew up in the late 70s and 80s, knowing what we would be experiencing. My children, I've never had to tell them that, because I think that when they get older, society will look a bit different to what it was when I was younger. And that's a good thing, that a disabled child, someone with autism, someone who has ADHD will have an opportunity. And this is the key thing, the key word here is access to opportunity, right? Once you've got access to opportunity, then you can fight to prove that you are good enough to do what is being required. Okay, no one no diverse supplier should expect to be awarded a tender just because they're female, just because they're Black, just because they're LGBTQ. That is not how this works. But should you be denied access to the opportunity because of that? Absolutely not. And that's where I think there's a real change in the temperature, or really accepting difference, and understanding how to appeal to difference and how to assess difference, which is actually just be normal.
Yeah.
Right. This is part of the validation process. You're here based on merit, which is perfectly fine. Yeah.
That's brilliant. I'm going to give you a bit of PR now. So if we've got people out there watching this thinking, love the platform, want to know more,
Yes.
how many suppliers do you have signed up at the moment? Because you kind of referenced the fact that actually you try and Google an LGBTQ meat provider, that's not instantly there for somebody. So how have you built that network, and how many suppliers do you have on board?
Yeah, so we've got a goal to this year. So the backstory is we began to build the platform in 2020. We began to market the whole story around supply diversity through 2021. A lot of hard work, a lot of posts. Spoke to over 120 CPOs, chief procurement officers. And this year, we're really beginning to get the traction now, because last year was the time for heads out of the sand. This year, firms are putting into place company policy. And next year, I think we'll see a really big traction with supply diversity across the UK and the EMEA territory. So we're looking to really engage to bring on board 40 corporate buyers this year, and have a diverse database of 5,000 diverse suppliers. Now, through that network that we'll develop, by 2026, we are targeting having 250,000 diverse suppliers inside one centralized database. And that means that irrespective of what territory you're going for, excluding the US, so we're not targeting the US at all, for a couple of reasons actually, but we feel that there's opportunity to capture diverse suppliers across the EMEA and Asia Pac region. Yeah. So anyone who has, anyone who has an appetite to understand a bit more about supply diversity and how to find those diverse suppliers, I would go as far as saying the only and the first UK-owned fully inclusive B2B marketplace that connects buyers and suppliers. There's no one else out there approaching the challenge like we are. And so we're quite proud of having that, being that first to market from that perspective. But we're not afraid of competition. But more importantly, it's not about Kaleida, as I mentioned. It's about whoever wants to help position and support and guide and help diverse organizations be more successful. That's really what this is about. But for us, again, our real core message is that exclusive is not inclusive, which is why we're a fully inclusive platform.
Brilliant. That's wonderful. Thank you so much for talking to me today. It's been an absolute pleasure. If anybody in my network wants to reach out to Jason, then you can connect with him on LinkedIn. I'm sure he'll be more than happy to have a conversation. I've seen a demo of his platform. It's absolutely amazing. So I would encourage our network to get in touch with him and just understand a little bit deeper about his platform. But thank you very much, Jason.
Thanks so much, Hayley. Thanks for having me.
All right, take care.